What's up and welcome to the channel. In today's episode we're going to be working on a Global MX5 Cup car, and on this car we've got a little bit of a backstory, so stay tuned. So this car was racing in a Global MX5 Cup car event in St. Petersburg, Florida. Now they had already secured the second place qualifying position, but in one of the later qualifying sessions they were trying to go for that first place spot. And that's when the mishap actually occurred. They got into the wall in one of the corners, and we actually got footage of that, so let's check it out. So this mishap could have ended their weekend, especially since the first race started at 8:30 the next morning. But they rallied the team and got all the help they could get, got this thing all back together. They got the car back to the pits around 4:45 p.m. and they finished up repairing the car around 4:30 a.m. So they worked on it roughly 12 hours throughout the night. They changed out both the cradles, they replaced all the suspension, they replaced a left fender and the front bumper cover, and a few other pieces along the way. Now, like I said, they finished up at about 4:30 a.m., which gave them a few hours shut-eye, and then they were on the grid and ready to go at 8:30 a.m. Now, once they got back on the track, the driver and the car really performed really well. They actually got on the podium and finished second in the first race of the weekend. They finished out the race weekend, then they brought the car to me, and we're going to make this thing like new. Let's have a look at what we've got. All right, so we got this Global MX5 Cup car. It's up on the rack. You see here they did some racing after they crashed it. Everybody that worked on it all night signed the fender, which is pretty cool. We're going to be putting a door on this thing, a new fender because the customer wants that fender. We're putting a quarter and repairing the inner and outer wheelhouse, if not replacing it. We're putting a new rear bumper on it. And here's all the parts for it. So let's get the rocker covers off this thing, get it up on the clamps, and get it all taken apart so we can see what we're working with. All right, so we've got the car all taken apart. We've got the new door here. Let's go ahead and get the center cut out for the cage clearance and get it test fit on the car. All right, so we've got the door test fit. So let's climb under this thing and start getting some measurements. Alright, so we've got our bottom measurements done. Let's go ahead and cut off this damaged quarter panel, which will expose our inner and outer wheelhouse. Now, by exposing the inner and outer wheelhouse, it'll give us a better idea on the viability of repairing it versus replacing it. So we're pulling on this outer wheelhouse, trying to get the outer wheelhouse to come out and pull the inner wheelhouse with it, but it's really not coming out like we want it to. So let me show you what I'm looking at. You can see here, these kinks aren't coming out really well, and as we're pulling on this outer wheelhouse, the inner wheelhouse is separating up underneath here. So it's really not pulling the inner wheelhouse out with it like we would like it. And you can see in here how wrinkled up it is. It's really not going to make a nice repair for us to try to repair that. So we've ordered a new inner and outer wheelhouse, and it should be here tomorrow. In the meantime, we're going to start working on the front end and get this core support cut off. So we've got the lower measurements of the front end, so now we're going to move to the top measurements of the front end, which is basically all the measurements of the strut towers and the core support and everything in the engine bay. We'll get all that measured, and then we can start pulling on the front end. Got the front end pulled where it's supposed to be. I'm not happy with the way the cradle is sitting against the frame rail. It's like the bolt, the mounting points for the cradle are pulled down. So we're going to drop this cradle and get it out of the way and try to address that. So we're going to be using this cradle for fitment purposes, and that means we're going to be putting it in and out of the car a lot. So to make this thing as light as possible, we're going to strip it down to a naked cradle. So with the cradle out of this thing, you can really see this bulge here, which means that these bolts are down, which is not letting the cradle sit flush against this frame rail. So what we've got to do now is get those pushed back up where they're supposed to be. Alright, so I've got the cradle studs pushed up and pulled to where I want them to be. So let's get the cradle bolted back in the car and get all the suspension put back on. As you can see, this core support's damaged pretty bad. We're going to be replacing this thing, and I've got the brand new one in the paint booth, and I'm going to be cutting it in while they cut off this old damaged one. Alright, so the damaged core support is off, and the new one is in the paint booth all painted. We've got all the bare metal treated with weld-through primer, and by cutting in the core support off the car before we weld it in, it allows me to get in all the crevices and all the back spaces that I would not normally be able to get into because the radiator is still in the car. You could pull the radiator out and you would be able to get to those spots, but we just want to leave the radiator in, get this thing welded in, and once it's welded in, I'll be able to spot in where the welds are.
I believe that everything's a hammer unless it's a screwdriver, and then it's a chisel.
Alright, so that's going to be about it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, hit that like button and share it with your friends. And if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and clicking on the bell icon. That way you won't miss any future content. Like the next video in this series, we should be getting the damaged inner and outer wheelhouse cut off the car, getting the new one welded in, getting everything fit on the car, and getting it ready for paint. You don't want to miss that. If you have any thoughts or questions, you can leave that in the section down below. And as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next video. See ya!